Good morning, students. Today we are going to discuss about aneurysms, vasculitis and vascular tumors. These are the learning objectives for today's lecture. At the end of this session, you must be able to define and classify aneurysms, describe pathogenesis and morphology and clinical manifestations of aneurysm, then define and describe dissecting aneurysm, define and classify vasculitis, describe the types of vasculitis, classify vascular tumors, describe benign vascular tumors and malignant vascular tumors. We will start the discussion with aneurysms. An aneurysm is defined as a permanent abnormal dilatation of a blood vessel or chambers of heart occurring due to congenital or acquired weakening or destruction of the vessel wall. When an aneurysm involves an attenuated, means weakened but intact arterial wall or thin ventricular wall of the heart, it is called a true aneurysm. In contrast, a false aneurysm, that is also called pseudoaneurysm, is a defect in the vascular wall leading to an extravascular hematoma, that is covered by only fibrous wall and not arterial wall, that freely communicates with the intravascular space, also known as pulsating hematoma, occurs most commonly from trauma to the vessel. And third entity, that is arterial dissection, arises when blood enters a defect in the arterial wall and tunnels between its layers. That means blood will be present in the layer of any vessel. Dissections are often but not always aneurysmal. Aneurysms can be classified on the basis of various features. First one is depending upon the composition of the wall. That means either it is a true aneurysm or a false aneurysm. As I said, true aneurysm is composed of all the layers of a normal vessel wall, and false aneurysm is having fibrous wall and occurring often from the trauma to the vessel. Now, classification depending upon the shape. There are mainly 5 types of aneurysms: secular, having large spherical outpouching; then fusiform, having spindle shaped dilatation; then cylindrical with a continuous parallel dilatation; then serpentine or varicose, which has tortuous dilatation of the vessel; then fifth one is racemose or sarcoid, having mass of intercommunicating small arteries and veins. You can see figure A is showing normal blood vessel, then figure B is showing true aneurysm, that is secular, the shape is secular. Then figure C shows fusiform aneurysm, and figure D shows false aneurysm, that is pulsating hematoma. You can see there is extravasation of blood outside the blood vessel, there is rupture of the vessel wall, and the hematoma is covered by only connective tissue or fibrous cap. And the figure E shows dissecting aneurysm, or you can say dissecting hematoma. You can see there is a tear in the intima and there is extravasation of blood in the vessel wall between intima and media, but not outside the vessel wall. These are the shapes. First one is secular, then fusiform, cylindrical, serpentine and racemose. Classification depending upon the pathogenetic mechanisms. First one is atherosclerotic aneurysm or arteriosclerotic aneurysms. These are the most common variety. Then syphilitic or lutic aneurysms. They are found in the tertiary stage of syphilis. Then dissecting aneurysms, or known as dissecting hematoma, in which the blood enters the separated or dissected wall of the vessel. Then mycotic aneurysms, which result from weakening of the arterial wall by any microbial infection. And rare variety is Berry aneurysms, which are small dilatations especially affecting the circle of Willis in the base of the brain. Now Most common variety is atherosclerotic aneurysms. These are the most common form of aortic aneurysms and seen more commonly in males, and the frequency increases after the age of 50 years. And most common, as I said, in abdominal aorta, and other locations are thoracic aorta, especially the ascending part of thoracic aorta and arch of the aorta, and iliac arteries. Pathogenesis of atherosclerotic aneurysm. Severe atherosclerotic lesions are the basic problem which cause thinning and destruction of the medial elastic tissue, resulting in atrophy and weakening of the wall. Now, morphological features. Atherosclerotic aneurysms of the abdominal aorta are most frequently infrarenal above the bifurcation of the aorta. They may be of variable size but are often larger than 5 to 6 cm in diameter. And atherosclerotic aneurysm is most frequently fusiform in shape, and the lumen of aneurysm often contains mural thrombus. Mural thrombus means organized thrombus. It contains blood clot as well as fibrin. Now, histologically, the wall of atherosclerotic aneurysm loses its normal arterial structure. Instead, there is predominance of fibrous tissue in the media and adventitia with mild chronic inflammatory reaction. Now, clinical manifestations of atherosclerotic aneurysms. There are mainly three types of manifestations: rupture, compression, and arterial occlusion. There can be either one of these three or all these three can be present. First one is rupture. Rupture of the atherosclerotic aneurysm is the most serious and fatal complication. The risk of rupture depends upon the size and duration of the aneurysm and the blood pressure. Rupture of abdominal aneurysm may occur either into the peritoneum or into the retroperitoneum, resulting in sudden and massive bleeding. Second one is compression. The atherosclerotic aneurysm may press upon some adjacent structures such as compression of ureter and erosion on the vertebral bodies. Third one is arterial occlusion. Atherosclerotic aneurysms of the abdominal aorta may occlude the inferior mesenteric artery, or there may be development of occlusive thrombosis. And thromboembolism is also common in abdominal aneurysms. This is the gross figure showing abdominal aortic aneurysm, and the rupture site is indicated by the arrow. Now, syphilitic aneurysm. Cardiovascular syphilis occurs in about 10% cases of syphilis. It causes arteritis, that is either in the aorta most commonly or in the cerebral arteries, known as syphilitic aortitis and cerebral arteritis. One of the major complications of syphilitic aortitis is syphilitic or lytic aneurysm that develops in the tertiary stage of syphilis. It usually manifests after the age of 50 years and is more common in men. The predominant site of involvement is the thoracic aorta, especially ascending part and arch of the aorta. Now, pathogenesis of syphilitic aneurysm. About 40% of cases of syphilitic aortitis develop syphilitic aneurysms. The process begins from inflammatory infiltrate around the vasa vasorum of the adventitia. These are the small capillaries present in the tunica adventitia, followed by endarteritis obliterans. This results in ischemic injury to the media, causing destruction of the smooth muscle and elastic tissue of the media and scarring. Endarteritis obliterans means inflammation of the vessel wall and then obliteration of the vascular lumen. This causes ischemic injury to the tunica media and causing destruction of the smooth muscle and elastic tissue of the media and then scarring. Morphological features. Syphilitic aneurysms are generally circular in shape and usually 3 to 5 cm in diameter, as contrast to the atherosclerotic aneurysms that is commonly present in aorta. The common shape is fusiform in atherosclerotic aortic aneurysm and common shape in syphilitic aneurysm is circular. The intimal surface is wrinkled and shows tree bark appearance. When the aortic valve is involved, there is stretching and rolling of the valve leaflets producing valvular incompetence and left ventricular hypertrophy due to volume overload. This results in massively enlarged heart, that is also known as cor bovinum. Histologically, the features of healed syphilitic aortitis are seen, that we will discuss later on. The adventitia shows fibrous thickening with end arteritis obliterans of vasa vasorum. Now, clinical manifestations of syphilitic aneurysm. Again, mostly these are of three types: rupture, compression and cardiac dysfunction. Syphilitic aneurysm is likely to rupture, causing massive and fatal hemorrhage into the pleural cavity, pericardial sac, trachea and esophagus. Compression. The aneurysm may press on the adjacent tissues and cause symptoms such as, if it is compressing trachea, then patient will feel dyspnea. Then if there is compression on the esophagus, it will cause dysphagia, and compression on recurrent laryngeal nerve leads to hoarseness of voice, and there may be compression on the vertebra causing erosion of the vertebra or erosion of the sternum and ribs due to persistent pressure. Then cardiac dysfunction. When the aortic root and valve are involved, syphilitic aneurysm produces aortic incompetence and cardiac failure. Now, dissecting aneurysms and cystic medial necrosis. The term dissecting aneurysm is applied for a dissecting hematoma in which the blood enters the separated or dissected wall of the vessel and spreads for varying distance longitudinally. The most common site is aorta. The condition occurs most commonly in men in the age or range of 50 to 70 years, and in women dissecting aneurysms may occur during pregnancy. Now, pathogenesis of dissecting aneurysm is divided mainly into two parts. One is hypertensive state and second one is non-hypertensive state. About 90% cases of dissecting aneurysm have hypertension, which predisposes such patients to degeneration of the media. And non-hypertensive cases, these are the cases in which there is some local or systemic connective tissue disorder. One is Marfan syndrome, that is an autosomal dominant disease with genetic defect in fibrillin, which is a connective tissue protein that is required for elastic tissue formation in the vessel wall. Then development of cystic medial necrosis of Arnhem, especially in the old age. Then iatrogenic trauma during cardiac catheterization or coronary bypass surgery. Once medial necrosis has occurred, hemodynamic forces or hemodynamic factors, chiefly hypertension, causes tear in the intima and initiate the dissecting aneurysms. The media is split at its weakest point by the inflowing blood. Morphological features of dissecting aneurysm differs from atherosclerotic and syphilitic aneurysms in having no significant dilatation. Therefore, it is currently referred to as dissecting hematoma rather than the dissecting aneurysm, because in aneurysm there must be some part of dilatation. Dissecting aneurysm classically or dissecting hematoma classically begins in the arch of aorta. The dissection is seen most characteristically between the outer and middle third of the aortic media, so that the column of blood in the dissection separates the intima and inner 2/3 of the tunica media on one side from the outer 1/3 of the tunica media and tunica adventitia on the other side. Histologically, the characteristic features of cystic medial necrosis are found, and these are focal separation of the fibromuscular and elastic tissue of the media. Focal means it is present in patches, not at all the sites, but at few places it will be present. Then numerous cystic spaces in the media, then fragmentation of the elastic tissue and increased fibrosis of the media. The classical clinical manifestations of a dissecting aneurysm is excruciating tearing pain in the chest that is moving downwards. The complications arising from dissecting aneurysms are rupture or any cardiac disease, hemorrhage from rupture of a Dissecting aneurysm in the ascending aorta results in mortality in 90% of the cases, and involvement of the aortic valve results in aortic incompetence. This is the figure that shows dissecting aneurysm. You can see the dissection that is present in the tunica media, and it separates the inner 2/3 of the tunica media and tunica intima from the outer 1/3 of the tunica media and adventitia. Now we will discuss about vasculitis. Arthritis, angiitis and vasculitis. These are the common terms used for inflammatory involvement of any artery, arterioles, venules or capillaries. It may occur following invasion of the vessel by infectious agents or may be induced by non-infectious injuries such as chemical injury, mechanical, immunological injury or radiation injury. This table shows classification of vasculitis. There are mainly two types of vasculitis. First one is infectious arthritis and second one is non-infectious arthritis. And examples of infectious arthritis are endarthritis obliterans, syphilitic arthritis and non-specific infective arthritis. And examples of non-infectious arthritis are polyarthritis nodosa, then hypersensitivity vasculitis also known as allergic vasculitis or leukocytoclastic vasculitis, then Wegener's granulomatosis, then temporal arthritis also known as giant cell arthritis, then Takayasu's arthritis also known as pulseless disease, then Kawasaki's disease, Berger's disease also known as thromboangiitis obliterans. Now we will discuss about infectious arthritis. Direct invasion of the artery by infectious agents, especially bacteria and fungi, causes infectious arthritis. It may be found in the vicinity of an infected focus like in tuberculosis, pneumonia, abscesses, etc. Or less frequently it may arise from hematogenous spread of any infection such as in infective endocarditis or septicemia. Endarthritis obliterans is not a disease entity but a pathological term that is used for non-specific inflammatory response of arteries and arterioles to a variety of irritants. It is commonly seen close to the lesions of peptic ulcers of the stomach and duodenum, tuberculosis and chronic abscesses in the lungs. Grossly, the affected vessels may appear unaltered externally but on cross section show obliteration of the lumina. Then microscopically, the obliteration of the lumen is due to concentric and symmetric proliferation of cellular fibrous tissue in the intima. There is minimal or no inflammatory cell infiltrate. Now syphilitic arthritis. Syphilitic or lytic vascular involvement occurs in all stages of syphilis but it is more prominent in the tertiary stage. The changes that are found in the syphilitic arthritis are seen within the arterial tissue or in the periarterial tissues. If the changes are only in the arterial tissue, then it is known as syphilitic endarthritis, and if it is present in the periarterial tissues, then it is known as syphilitic periarthritis. Endarthritis means it involves the only vessel wall and particularly tunica intima. Manifestations of the disease are particularly prominent at two sites, aorta and cerebral arteries. If it is in aorta, it is known as syphilitic aortitis, and when it involves cerebral arteries, it is known as cerebral syphilitic arthritis or Hübner's arthritis. Syphilitic involvement of the ascending aorta and the aortic arch is the commonest manifestation of cardiovascular syphilis. It occurs in about 80% of cases of tertiary syphilis. Grossly, the affected part of the aorta may be dilated and its wall somewhat thickened and adherent to the neighboring mediastinal structures. Longitudinally, opened vessels show intimal surface studded with pearly white thickenings. These lesions are separated by wrinkled normal intima and giving it characteristic tree bark appearance. Microscopically, the conspicuous features of syphilitic aortitis are endarteritis and periarteritis of the vasa vasorum located in the media and adventitia. There is perivascular accumulation of plasma cells, lymphocytes and macrophages, and intimal thickenings consist of dense collagen that may undergo hyalinization and calcification. The effects of syphilitic aortitis are aortic aneurysm may result from damage to the aortic wall. Then aortic valvular incompetence results from spread of the syphilitic process to the aortic valve ring, and stenosis of the coronary ostia is seen about 20% of cases of syphilitic aortitis and may lead to progressive myocardial fibrosis, angina pectoris and sudden. This is the picture showing syphilitic aortitis. There is endarteritis and periarteritis of the vasa vasorum in the media and adventitia, and there is perivascular infiltrate of plasma cells, lymphocytes and macrophages. You can see the tree bark thickening of the intima, then presence of inflammation in the wall of the vessel and around the vessel, that is endarteritis and periarteritis. Now, non-specific infective arthritis, various forms of invasions of the artery by bacteria, fungi, parasites or viruses, either directly or by hematogenous route, cause non-specific infective arthritis. Microscopically, the inflammatory infiltrate is present in the vessel wall. The vascular lumen may get occluded by thrombi and result in ischemic necrosis of the affected tissue. Now, we will start discussion of non-infectious arthritis. This group consists of most of the important forms of vasculitis, more often affecting arterioles, venules and capillaries, and hence they are also known as small vessel vasculitis. Their exact etiology is not known, but available evidence suggests that many of them have immunological origin, and serum from many of these patients with vasculitis of immunological origin show the presence of these two types of antibodies. These are anti-neutrophil cytoplasmic antibodies and anti-endothelial cell antibodies. Patients with immunological vasculitis have autoantibodies in their serum against the cytoplasmic antigens of the neutrophils, macrophages and endothelial cells. These are called ANCS, means anti-neutrophil cytoplasmic antibodies. Neutrophil immunofluorescence is used to demonstrate their presence, of which there are two types of patterns. They are known as C-ANCA and P-ANCA. C means cytoplasmic, P means perinuclear. Cytoplasmic pattern is specific for proteinase 3, a constituent of neutrophilic granules, and this is seen in cases with active Wegener's granulomatosis. And perinuclear pattern is specific for myeloperoxidase enzyme. This is noted in patients with microscopic polyarthritis nodosa. And anti-endothelial cell antibodies are demonstrable in cases of SLE, that is systemic lupus erythematosus, Kawasaki disease and Buerger's disease. Now we will discuss one by one. First one is polyarthritis nodosa. Is an necrotizing vasculitis involving small and medium-sized muscular arteries of multiple organs and tissues. Inflammatory involvement occurs in all the layers of the vessel wall. Most commonly affected organs in descending order of frequency of involvement are kidneys, heart, liver, gastrointestinal tract, muscle, pancreas, testes, nervous system and skin. Usual clinical features are fever, malaise, weakness, weight loss, renal manifestations. These are albuminuria, hematuria and renal failure, and vascular lesions in the alimentary tract, and the symptoms are abdominal pain and melena. This condition results from deposition of immune complexes. Grossly, the lesions of polyarthritis nodosa involve segments of the vessels, especially at the bifurcations and branchings, as tiny beaded nodules, and microscopically there are three sequential stages in the evolution of lesions. One is acute stage, then healing stage and then healed stage. In acute stage, there is fibrinoid necrosis in the center of the nodule located in the media, an acute inflammatory response develops around the focus of fibrinoid necrosis. The inflammatory infiltrate consists chiefly of neutrophils and eosinophils. In healing stage, it is characterized by marked fibroblastic proliferation of producing firm nodularity. The inflammatory infiltrate now consists of lymphocytes, and in healed stage, the affected arterial wall is markedly thickened due to dense fibrosis. Now, Wegener's granulomatosis. It is another form of necrotizing vasculitis characterized by a clinico-pathological triad consisting of acute necrotizing granulomas of the upper and lower respiratory tracts involving nose, sinuses and lungs, then focal necrotizing vasculitis particularly of the lungs and upper airways, and focal or diffuse necrotizing glomerulonephritis. The etiology is not known, but possibly the lesions occur due to the presence of circulating immune complexes. This is supported by the observation of subepithelial immunoglobulin deposits on the glomerular basement membrane, and the serum of these patients shows C-ANCA positivity. Histologically, the characteristic feature of Wegener's granulomatosis is the presence of necrotizing granulomatous inflammation of the tissues and necrotizing vasculitis with or without granulomas. The granulomas consist of fibrinoid necrosis with extensive infiltration by neutrophils, mononuclear cells, epithelioid cells and sometimes multinucleated giant cells. Now, temporal arteritis, also known as giant cell arteritis. This is a form of granulomatous inflammation of medium-sized and large arteries, and preferential sites of involvement are the cranial arteries, especially the temporal arteries. That is why it is known as temporal arteritis. The patients are generally over the age of 70 years. The usual clinical manifestations are headache and blindness if ophthalmic artery is also involved. Grossly, the affected artery is thickened, cord-like, and the lumen is usually reduced to a narrow slit. Histologically, the features include the following. There is chronic granulomatous reaction, usually around the internal elastic lamina, and typically involves the entire circumference of the vessel. Giant cells of foreign body type are also found in 2/3 of cases. Now, Takayasu arteritis, also known as pulseless disease. This is a form of granulomatous vasculitis affecting chiefly the aorta and its major branches, and hence is also referred to as aortic arch syndrome. The disease affects chiefly young women and is typically characterized by absence of pulse in both the arms and presence of ocular manifestations. Grossly, the aortic wall is irregularly thickened and intima is wrinkled. The branches of major arteries coming off the aortic arch have obliterated lumina. And histological findings are: there is severe mononuclear inflammatory infiltrate involving the full thickness of the affected vessel wall. Granulomatous changes in the media with central necrosis and giant cells are found in many cases. Kawasaki's disease, and it is also known as mucocutaneous lymph node syndrome. It is an acute and subacute illness affecting mainly young children and infants. Kawasaki's disease is a febrile illness with mucocutaneous symptoms like erosions of oral mucosa and conjunctiva, skin rash and lymphadenopathy. The most characteristic finding is the presence of multiple aneurysms of the coronaries. Histologically, the picture resembles of polyarteritis nodosa characterized by necrosis and inflammation of the entire thickness of the vessel wall. Now, Buerger's disease, also known as thromboangiitis obliterans. Buerger's disease is a specific disease entity affecting chiefly small and medium-sized arteries and veins of the extremities and characterized by acute and chronic occlusive inflammatory involvement. The disease affects chiefly men under the age of 35 years who are heavy cigarette smokers. The symptom complex consists of intermittent claudication due to ischemia manifested by intense pain affecting the limbs, more commonly the legs. Eventually, gangrene of the affected extremities occurs requiring amputation. Microscopically, the following changes are seen in different stages of the disease: in early stage and in advanced stage. In early stage, there is infiltration by polymorphs in all the layers of the vessels, and there is invariable presence of mural or occlusive thrombosis of the lumen. And in advanced stage, the cellular infiltrate is predominantly mononuclear and may contain an occasional epithelioid cell granuloma with giant cells. The thrombi undergo organization and recanalization. This is the figure showing Burgers disease. There is acute panarteritis. The lumen is occluded by a thrombus containing microabscesses. Panarteritis means inflammation involving all the layers of the blood vessel, that is inflammation involving tunica intima, media and adventitia. And thrombus containing microabscesses means there is presence of neutrophils, pus cells in the thrombus itself. Now, vascular tumors and tumor-like lesions. Majority of benign vascular tumors are malformations or hematomas. Now, hematoma is a tumor-like lesion. It is not a tumor, but it is tumor-like lesion made up of tissues indigenous to the part. Indigenous to the part means it is present at its original site, but lacks the true growth potential of a neoplasm. That means there is only disorganized growth of any tissue, particularly at its original site, but it is not a true neoplasm. But there is no clear-cut distinction between vascular hematomas and true benign tumors, and are often described together. This is the table showing classification of vascular tumors, and benign vascular tumors are hemangioma, lymphangioma, glomus tumor also known as glomangioma, then arteriovenous malformations and bacillary angiomatosis. And intermediate grade tumors are hemangioendothelioma. Then malignant tumors are hemangiopericytoma, angiosarcoma and Kaposi sarcoma. First of all, we will discuss about benign tumors. Hemangiomas are quite common lesions, especially in infancy and childhood. The most common site is the skin of the face and mucosal surfaces. There are three types: capillary hemangioma, cavernous hemangioma and granuloma pyogenesis. Capillary hemangioma, these are the most common type. Clinically, they appear as small or large, flat or slightly elevated, red to purple, soft and lobulated lesions varying in size from a few millimeters to a few centimeters in diameter. They may be present at birth or appear in early childhood. The common sites are the skin, subcutaneous tissue and mucous membranes of oral cavity and lips. Histologically, capillary hemangiomas are well defined but unencapsulated lobules. These lobules are composed of capillary sized, thin walled, blood filled vessels. These vessels are lined by a single layer of plump endothelial cells. The vessels are separated by some connective tissue stroma, and many of the capillary hemangiomas regress spontaneously within a few years. This is the gross figure of hemangioma of the tongue. This is the microscopical view of hemangioma, capillary hemangioma of the skin. There are capillaries lined by endothelial cells containing blood, and the intervening stroma consists of scant connective tissue. Now, cavernous hemangioma. These are single or multiple, diffuse, red to blue, soft and spongy masses. They are often 1 to 2 cm in diameter, and they are most common in the skin, especially of the face and neck. Histologically, cavernous hemangiomas are composed of thin-walled cavernous vascular spaces. That means large vascular spaces filled partly or completely with blood. The vascular spaces are lined by flattened endothelial cells. They are separated by scanty connective tissue stroma, and cavernous hemangiomas rarely involute spontaneously. This is the microscopical view of cavernous hemangioma of the liver. The vascular spaces are large, dilated and containing blood and lined by flattened endothelial cells. Scanty connective tissue stroma is seen between the cavernous spaces, and you can also see the normal liver tissue. This is another image of cavernous hemangioma. You can see the large vascular spaces filled with blood, and in between these vascular spaces are connective tissue stroma. Now granuloma pyogenicum is also referred to as hemangioma of granulation tissue type. It appears as exophytic red granulation tissue just like a nodule commonly on the skin and mucosa of gingiva or oral cavity. It often develops following trauma and is usually 1 to 2 cm in diameter. Histologically, it shows proliferating capillaries similar to the capillary hemangioma, but the capillaries are separated by abundant edema and inflammatory infiltrate, thus resembling inflammatory granulation tissue. This is gross image of pyogenic granuloma of the lip. Now lymphangioma. Lymphangiomas are lymphatic counterparts of vascular angiomas. Lymphangiomas are congenital lesions which are classified as capillary, cavernous and cystic hygroma. Now capillary lymphangioma is also known as lympangioma simplex. It is a small circumscribed slightly elevated lesion measuring 1 to 2 cm in diameter. The common locations are the skin of head and neck, axilla and mucous membranes. Histologically, capillary lymphangioma is composed of a network of endothelium-lined capillary-sized spaces containing lymph and often separated by lymphoid aggregates. Cavernous lymphangioma is more common than the capillary type. The common sites are in the region of head and neck or axilla. A large cystic variety of cavernous lymphangioma is also known as cystic hygroma, occurs in the neck, producing gross deformity in the neck. Histologically, cavernous lymphangioma consists of large dilated lymphatic spaces lined by flattened endothelial cells and containing lymph. Scanty intervening stromal connective tissue is also present. This is the image showing microscopical view of cavernous lymphangioma of the tongue. You can see the large cystic spaces lined by flattened endothelial cells and containing lymph are present. And stroma shows scattered collection of lymphocytes. Now glomus tumor, also known as glomangioma. Glomus tumor is an uncommon benign tumor arising from contractile glomus cells that are present in the arteriovenous shunts. These tumors are found most often in the dermis of the fingers or toes under a nail. These lesions are characterized by extreme pain. They may be single or multiple, small, often less than 1 cm in diameter, flat or slightly elevated, red or blue, painful nodules. Histologically, the tumors are composed of small blood vessels lined by endothelium and surrounded by aggregates, nests and masses of glomus cells. The glomus cells are round to cuboidal cells with scanty cytoplasm. This is the image showing microscopical view of glomus tumor. There are blood-filled vascular channels lined by endothelial cells and surrounded by nests and masses of glomus cells. Now intermediate grade tumors, and example is hemangioendothelioma. It is a tumor of endothelial cells and behavior of which is intermediate between a hemangioma and angiosarcoma. It is found most often in the skin and subcutaneous tissue in relation to medium sized and large veins. Hemangioblastoma is the term used for similar tumor occurring in cerebellum. Now microscopically, there is an active proliferation of endothelial cells forming several layers around the blood vessels so that vascular lumina are very difficult to identify. Now last portion of our lecture, malignant vascular tumors. First one is hemangiopericytoma. Hemangiopericytoma is an uncommon tumor arising from pericytes. Pericytes are the cells present external to the endothelial cells of capillaries and venules. Microscopically, the tumor is composed of capillaries surrounded by spindle-shaped pericytes outside the vascular basement membrane forming whorled arrangement. Now, angiosarcoma, it is also known as hemangiosarcoma and malignant hemangioendothelioma. It is a malignant vascular tumor occurring most frequently in the skin, subcutaneous tissue, liver, spleen, bone, lung, and retroperitoneal tissues. Microscopically, the tumors may be well differentiated masses of proliferating endothelial cells around well formed vascular channels to poorly differentiated lesions composed of plump anaplastic and pleomorphic cells in solid clusters with poorly identifiable vascular channels. Anaplastic means loss of differentiation. Now the last one is Kaposi's sarcoma. It is a malignant angiomatous tumor that was first described by Kaposi in 1872. Classification of Kaposi sarcoma. There are mainly 4 types of Kaposi sarcoma that have been described. First one is classic Kaposi sarcoma, also known as European Kaposi sarcoma. This is the form which was first described by Kaposi. The disease is slow growing and appears as multiple small purple dome-shaped nodules or plaques in the skin, especially on the legs. Second one is African Kaposi sarcoma, that is endemic Kaposi sarcoma, is common in Africa. Then epidemic Kaposi sarcoma, also known as AIDS associated Kaposi sarcoma, is seen in about 30% of cases of AIDS. The cutaneous lesions are not localized to lower legs but are more extensively distributed, involving mucous membranes, lymph nodes, and internal organs. Kaposi sarcoma in renal transplant cases. Pathogenesis of Kaposi sarcoma is complex. It is an opportunistic neoplasm in immunosuppressed patients which has excessive proliferation of spindle cells of vascular origin. Morphological features are: pathologically all the forms of Kaposi sarcoma are similar. Histologically the changes are non-specific in the early patch stage and more characteristic in the late node. In early patch stage, there are irregular vascular spaces separated by interstitial inflammatory cells and extravasated blood and hemosiderin. And in late nodular stage, there are slit-like vascular spaces containing red blood cells and separated by spindle-shaped plump tumor cells. This is the gross image of Kaposi sarcoma, and this is the microscopical view of Kaposi sarcoma in late nodular stage. There are slit-like blood-filled vascular spaces with extravasated RBCs, and between them are present bands of plump spindle-shaped tumor cells. Now clinical course of Kaposi sarcoma and biological behavior is quite variable. The classic form of Kaposi sarcoma is largely confined to skin and the course is generally slow and insidious with long survival of the patient. And the endemic and epidemic type of Kaposi sarcoma are having very rapid progressive course and often with widespread cutaneous as well as visceral organ involvement and having high mortality. So this concludes today's lecture. Thank you.